Welcome, everyone. Glad everyone's here. My name is Catherine Foreman Gray, and I'm a History and Preservation Officer with Cherokee Nation. And this is the first of 5 Monday Lunch and Learn lecture series that we're going to be doing throughout the month of November to celebrate Native American Heritage Month. Our first presenter to kick all of this off is going to be Will Chavez, who is a senior reporter for the Cherokee Phoenix newspaper. A little bit about Will Chavez. He lives in Tahlequah, but calls Marble City, Oklahoma his hometown. He is Cherokee and San Felipe Pueblo and grew up learning the Cherokee language, traditions, and culture from his Cherokee mother and family. He also appreciates his father's Pueblo culture and, when possible, attends annual traditional dances held on the San Felipe Reservation near Albuquerque, New Mexico. He enjoys studying and writing about Cherokee history and culture and writing stories about Cherokee veterans. For Will, the most enjoyable part of writing for the Cherokee Phoenix is having the opportunity to meet Cherokee people from all walks of life. He earned a mass communications degree from Northeastern State University with a minors in marketing and psychology. He is a member of the Native American Journalists Association. Will has worked in the newspaper and public relations field for 20 years. He has performed public relations work for the Cherokee Nation and has been a reporter and photographer for the Cherokee Phoenix for more than 18 years. Let's welcome today Will Chavez.
I guess in those 20 years I've seen a lot of history, and I've got to report on a lot of it, and some of it bad, a lot of it was good, but I can always say I saw it firsthand or was there or whatever, but it's been a good journey. Well, I hope to share stuff with you today about the Phoenix that maybe you haven't heard before. I know some of you all in here also study history, Trail of Tears history, Cherokee history, but so forgive me if I end up reading word for word sometimes what I have here, because I don't want to leave anything out while I'm talking. And if you want to ask questions while I'm talking also, just raise your hand. We'll stop. I don't mind. So it's for me anyway, if it's a matter of pride, I know my coworkers probably feel the same way. We feel really proud to work for the paper because of its history and how long we've been around. The Phoenix hasn't been around all that long, but we've had journalism for almost 190 years now. So that's something to be proud of. The Cherokee Phoenix actually started on February 21st, 1828. It was the first Native American newspaper, which is something to be proud of there. And it was also the first bilingual newspaper. It was written in Cherokee and English. And we used Sequoia syllabary for the Cherokee, of course. I think not many people know, but the creation of the paper in 1825 by the Cherokee National Council was part of an assimilation, I guess you could call it a project, because they wanted, our Cherokee leaders wanted to assimilate and I shouldn't say act white, but be more like our white neighbors, have stores, have businesses, have a government, have a newspaper to placate our white neighbors. So maybe we'd get to stay in Georgia, but we were more like them, they thought. And so we did that. They did that. We did that, and pretty quickly too. From the 1820s into the 1830s, we had a lot of progress. But of course, as we all know, that didn't work. I mean, if anything, our white neighbors became more jealous of what we had, and they wanted it even more. So it didn't do any good to out-white our white neighbors at that point. So, as many of you know, Elias Boudinot was the first editor of the paper, and always people will ask sometimes, why the Phoenix? Why do you use the Cherokee Phoenix? Well, Elias went to school in Cornwall, Connecticut. He had a benefactor that paid for his schooling up there, and he learned about the phoenix bird of Egyptian mythology that consumes itself in fire every 500 years and is reborn from the ashes. And he thought that was a pretty neat idea. And so he brought that back, and when the talk of the paper came about, that's he suggested the name. Boudinot was part of a prominent Cherokee family. His brother was Stanwady. He was the nephew of Major Ridge and the cousin of John Ridge. And his family, and along with the Hicks family, Charles Hicks and Elijah Hicks, who were father and son, I guess you could consider them the elite part of the Cherokee Nation back then. They were the leaders. And they all believed that if we became more acculturated into the white society, that we could maybe survive there, maybe survive in Georgia and stay. But like I said, it didn't work. We need to give credit to the missionary, Samuel Worcester, that was living among us at the time, for helping get the paper going. Not many people know what Samuel did, along with the Board of Commissions for Foreign Missions that was living among the Cherokee Nation at the time. They helped build a printing press, or they helped build a printing office. They had type cast into Cherokee syllabary, and they got other equipment, and they had the building built in the nation there at Newachota for the paper. Also, Boudinot and these brothers Stan and John Ridge and Elijah Hicks all went on a tour. Boudinot went into Philadelphia and New York City to get financing for the paper. And while he was there, he would talk about the Cherokee Nation, how far we've advanced, and how we're becoming more acculturated into the white society. He was trying to get people to be on our side, which I think he did a good job of it. But he also got funding, which was good. So with that funding, they were able to buy the printing press, which was set up in Newachota. And the first issue was printed in 1828. And as I said before, the Cherokee's white neighbors were not impressed by all of our advancements, and the pressure kept on for taking our land and pushing us west. And so as the paper became pretty popular, as it became more popular, Boudinot realized other tribes like the Creeks, our neighbors south, and Choctaws were also being pressured to leave their lands. And so he wanted to change the name of the paper from Cherokee Phoenix to the Cherokee Phoenix Indian Advocate, to advocate for other tribes that were our neighbors. And so the National Council agreed with him, and in 1829 they did that. They changed the name of the paper to reflect Boudinot's willingness to help other tribes. Can someone tell me what happened the next year in 1830? It changed everything. Yes, the Removal Act came about. Congress passed it in May of 1830, which pretty much gave President Jackson the authority to negotiate with tribes to get them to move west across the Mississippi River. Of course, a lot of tribes were resistant to that. And so Boudinot and John Ross, they both wrote articles in the Phoenix at the time to speak out against the act and speak out against removal, period. And they also spoke up against the harassment from the Georgians that was constantly going on. The Cherokee people were being harassed. And also the paper had news items, features, accounts from Cherokees living in Arkansas and other tribes, accounts about social and religious activities that were going on in the area. The two U.S. Supreme Court decisions, Cherokee Nation versus Georgia and Worcester versus Georgia, which affected Cherokee rights, were also written about extensively in the paper. As time went on, though, after 1830, Boudinot began to see that there was no way that we were going to stay, and he began to advocate to in the paper that we give up and go ahead and sign our land away, and which John Ross didn't agree with. And so in early 1832, they finally had a split. They finally disagreed so much that Boudinot finally resigned as editor. And later that year, Elijah Hicks, was now brother-in-law of Ross, was appointed editor. But however, in just 2 years, though, in 1834, the paper ran out of money and it went away anyway. So we lost the paper. It only lasted 7 years at that point. So not many people realize, if you count the 7 years we were publishing there and the 15 or so we've been publishing here, we've only been published in 22 years. The Phoenix has only been published in 22 years total. The rest of the time it's been the Cherokee Advocate or Cherokee Nation News, whatever came along over the years. But I didn't realize that till the other day myself. I got to counting and doing the math. It hit me that Phoenix really hasn't published that long. There were attempts to revive the paper before the removal came along in 1838, but there was never enough money, and there was just too much turmoil within the tribe fighting removal that there was just no, that was put on the back burner to bring the paper back. So when word leaked that Chief Ross was wanting to move the printing press from New Echota to Red Clay, which is where we had to reestablish our government seat, because Georgia was pushing on us so much. The Georgia Guard came in with Stanwady, Boudinot's brother, you remember, and they burned the print house and destroyed the printing press. If you go to New Echota today, they did recover some of the type, the Cherokee type and the English type that was thrown in a well there. It's on display. But yeah, they pretty much shut down the paper at that point. And Stanwady was a member of the Treaty Party, which at that time in 1834 was advocating that we leave, that we sign away the land, which they did in December 1835. Stan and some other Boudinot, some others signed the treaty to celebrate what remained of our land. So we all know what happened next. In the spring of 1838, the removal began. They began rounding up Cherokees in Alabama and Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina, and began moving them to concentration camps. And where they stayed most of the summer, and then that fall, most of them began moving this way to Indian Territory. When we got here, we reorganized our government. The three major factions that were here, the Treaty Party, the Old Settlers, and John Ross's faction, all agreed to join, and we formed a new government in summer of 1839. So within 5 years, we had new government buildings, new homes. We had a Supreme Court building downtown, which is still standing. It's there across the street from the Capitol building in town. So it was Chief Ross's vision to, according to the accounts I read, it was his vision to bring the paper back, a newspaper, and he had the council meet in October 1843, and they agreed to fund the newspaper, but it didn't come online until the following September in 1844. We had the Cherokee Advocate. But I'll read this part. The Advocate was to inform, encourage the Cherokees in agriculture, education, and religion, and to enlighten the world with correct Indian news. This is an issue from 1892, the Advocate. If y'all can see it from there. Our editor found this in Tahlequah. Somebody was getting rid of it. There was like 4 sheets of it. That's the thing about the paper. We never had enough funding. From 1853 till statehood, or 1906, the paper came and went. It depended on how much money the tribe had to print it. So the first editor was John Ross's nephew, William Potter Ross, who was a graduate of the University of Princeton. The paper was printed in English and Cherokee again. And I always asked the question before, why didn't they continue with the Cherokee Phoenix name? I never got an answer. And finally, Dr. Dan Littlefield from the University of Arkansas told me his theory about it, which I thought was pretty pretty good. From what his research came up with, he thinks that Ross used the Cherokee Phoenix and Indian Advocate name and just cut it down to Cherokee Advocate. He used the first and last words. And Dr. Littlefield also speculates that because the Phoenix was still associated with Boudinot, who had been assassinated along with his uncle Major Ridge and cousin John Ridge in June 1839, because you remember they did sign the treaty that sold the land. Ross wanted to distance himself from Boudinot and the paper be something new and not anything associated with Boudinot. So that's Dr. Littlefield's thoughts on that, and I tend to agree with him because it seems like there was still a lot of hard feelings at that point about what happened with the removal and the assassination. Ross also wanted the newspaper's editors to quote, toe the line and not speak out against the nation's laws or against him, basically, and like Boudinot did on the removal issue. And he also wanted, he didn't want politics in the Cherokee Advocate, which I don't see how you could remove that, but I guess he really put that stipulation in. And he, according to Littlefield, his words, he says he was really worried about having rogue editors again. He didn't want anybody like Boudinot speaking their mind. He wanted just an editor that would follow what he wanted them to do. So, like I said, production of the Phoenix was hit and miss between 1853 and 1906. Lack of funds most of the time stopped it. William Penn and Boudinot, and I can't remember, I apologize, I should have looked it up, but how he was kin to Elias. Brought the paper back in 1870. Then it was shut down again when a fire destroyed the printing office and equipment in February 1875, which is at Supreme Court building. That's across the street from the Capitol. That's where the fire was. The paper came again and went, until March of 1906 when it ceased printing because the Cherokee Nation was dissolved by the U.S. government in preparation for statehood, Oklahoma statehood. So we get into more, some of you all might remember more of this time period, but basically Cherokee journalism was dormant for 46 years, until 1950. And someone started printing a paper called, it was a newsletter mostly, the New Cherokee Advocate. Wadey Pettit served as its editor, but it started in early 1950, but it was gone by the October of that year, so it didn't last long. Another publication, the Cherokee Nation News, began publishing in March 1968. Does anyone remember that one? I've seen copies of it before in museums, but I've never held one. That one continued till December 1976. I think Sandy Long said she worked on the Cherokee Nation News, if you all know Sandy. She's been around forever. And that one provided general news about the tribe's programs, news affecting all tribes, and profiles on Cherokee people. Interestingly, one of the writers for that publication was Wes Studi from Adair County. He wrote articles and columns under the pseudonym of Anyway James. Anybody remember that? That was years before he became an actor in Hollywood. So the Cherokee Advocate came back again in 1975, and when the government came back, the Cherokee Nation government was reestablished in 1975. We had another constitution, and of course it kind of stayed with the previous advocates. Wrote stories about the Cherokee people, the government programs, chief and tribal council. And that one it stayed printing from 1977 to 1981, when the funding again cut it out. So then it came back in 83, and it stayed going until when I started working in 1994, it was still here. So it never went away after 1983. But the thing is, I wanted to say this part because I want to use it as comparison to how the paper is now. Back then, the Cherokee Advocate was still a communications tool of the principal chief mainly, like it had been under Ross. I mean, the chief had pretty much final say about what went in the paper and everything. So, stories are mostly about him or the tribal council, some culture and history, maybe, and a lot of tribal services stories. And eventually the paper was placed under the Cherokee Nation Public Affairs Department, which is, I came in when it was under the Public Affairs, which pretty much prevented any negative ever being said about the chief or tribal council or anything. It was pretty straight, pretty boring. Writers didn't get credit for their stories, and we're anonymous, I guess, mostly. Probably can't see it from out there, but this is these are bound copies from 1997 of the Cherokee Advocate, and it was a tabloid size, like this size here. So the Advocate kept going until 2000. In October 2000, the government tribal council agreed to let us rename the paper back to the original title, Cherokee Phoenix and Indian Advocate again. The same year, the tribal council passed the Cherokee Independent Press Act. This was the size of the paper when it was changed. This was from 2006 here. So the Independent Press Act is basically a free press act, which protects the newspaper from undue influence from the tribe's administration and tribal council. And also, during that time period, 2000, reporters began getting bylines for their stories, so we were no longer anonymous. Got credit for our stories. And to me, this is something to be proud of, this part of it, because to have a free press in Indian country is pretty rare. There's only 4 tribes out of all the tribes in this country, over 500 tribes that have a free press. The Navajo Nation, Osage Nation based their free press off of ours, and the Muskogee Creeks just this month got their free press, which they based it off of our act also. But I think that's something to be proud of, because I've seen it both ways, where we write, I'll just call it, we write fluff, where it wasn't much, the stories were just one-sided all the time. So to have a free press and be able to get both sides of a story is really neat if you've seen it the other way. So in 2002, the paper went ahead and reverted back to the Cherokee Phoenix only. That was the name we started using, and we still use that title. In 2007, we got a website, and we began publishing what's called a broadsheet format, which is a usual format for a newspaper. Which is this month's issue right now. We also have a website. We have Twitter. We use Twitter. We use Facebook. We have a radio show, and so we send out a daily newsletter via email. So, compared to where we started and where we've come through the last almost 190 years, I'm just glad we're still around, but I'm amazed at what we have to share the news with these days. The current readership for our paper is about 90,000 people, and it's read nationally and internationally. So we're out there. We're quite a few places. I know in the past we've had subscribers in Europe and Greece and other places like that. Cherokee people living abroad, so that's pretty neat too. I did I don't know if you could ever find this journal, but Gilcrease puts it out I think quarterly. I did an article for this one about the history of our newspapers. It's more comprehensive than what I was able to give you here, so if you ever run into this, if you want more, maybe it's on their website too now, but I did that a couple years ago for Go Crease. And I was able to be a little more thorough as far as details about editors and who was editing it in certain years. So, it's amazing. The tribe survived statehood, and we were able to come back. So it's even more amazing to me that we were conscious enough to bring our paper back with it. So I'm proud to work for Cherokee Phoenix and continue our journalism that we've done, like I said, almost 190 years now. Well, thank you.